Hey everyone, welcome to our first session of our career series. We're super excited to have Trinh with us, who works here at Udacity, and she has developed career content for our Grow with Google Scholars. That is, I think, will be a wonderful resource, and a lot of you have already seen it in your classroom. But she also works with our alumni here to land jobs. So she has a lot of great knowledge and resources, and I think that it will be really beneficial to hear from her today. So she will be going over some of the questions you've already submitted beforehand. And in the last 20 minutes or so, she'll answer questions that you ask live. So feel free to ask questions in the group chat, and I will be moderating, and I will pick the best ones for Trinh to answer. So here she is.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be able to speak with you today because I've kind of been in the background and I've seen a lot of your journey. And to kind of accomplish what you've done in phase one, I just want to give you a huge congratulations. A lot of the questions that came in were about, how do I get started? How do I, do the first step on this? And I think you're actually well on your way already. So up next, I have for you a presentation on, what is the career lesson? What's it about? And I'll be able to answer some of the common questions and then take live questions. So I'm going to share my screen with you and then start the presentation. Please ask your questions in YouTube. All right, so let's get started. So I titled this "How to Move Forward on Your Career Journey," not how to start, because remember, you've already started. So first, who am I? My name is Trinh Nguyen. I'm a program manager on the careers team, and I work on career services and content. I put two pictures of myself in there because you may have seen me. The first is of me at our Udacity's Intersect conference a few weeks ago, where I'm speaking with a nanography graduate. And the other is if you've already gone into the classroom to see the career lesson, then you may have already seen this screenshot of me and my colleague, Chris, who is an engineer on the careers team. A little bit about me. I've been with Udacity. This is my third year. And since I've joined, we've really expanded, and I've gotten to see our student base and our graduate base grow really, really rapidly and be able to actually meet different types of people. Like, there's so many people, and just to hear about their stories. And the common thread is that everybody wants to kind of progress in their career, and it includes getting started sometimes, like this is my first job. It includes career transitions. It includes getting back into the workforce, all these things. So I'm really lucky to have been able to hear your stories, and not only that, but to be able to tell your stories to employers and get feedback from employers from what they want to see in potential candidates. Before I joined Udacity, I actually worked in Washington, D.C. in federal education policy, and I helped other kind of businesses and nonprofits and government agencies around the US and sometimes internationally figure out like how they can attract tech talent. I'm in Silicon Valley right now, but I've actually worked with employers and business organizations in Miami, Salt Lake City, Cleveland, Las Vegas, so and much more. So I'm really glad to actually be here, and I hope that my background will be of help to you today. So you all had a lot of questions, and I found 5 common trends in them. So I'm going to try to summarize them in the next slides. And if you feel like I have not yet answered your question, please feel free to ask it in the YouTube chat, and we'll try to get to it. So a really common question was, I have 10 plus years of experience in another field. How should I approach looking for entry-level jobs? And so the trend behind these questions are just, my background is different. It's non-traditional. Maybe you were a lawyer for 10 years and now you want to become a web developer. How does that even work, right? Or you're some of you pursued PhDs and then you realize, oh great, now I want to change my career. I want to look for this job, but I feel like these jobs are available to me. They're 21-year-olds applying for it. Like, is there a place for me? We'll definitely get to that question, but I'll summarize the next question. A really common question was, how can you possibly compete for entry-level jobs that don't seem to be so entry-level, that ask for years of experience or that ask for a college degree? And the trend behind this is just you feel like you want this job, you feel like you could do this job, but the employer is asking for stuff that you can't go back in time. You can't. You're not in a place to go back to college and get a computer science degree. So how can you still get this job? And so we'll definitely address that in this presentation. So another common thing was just you're very focused on your learning right now, and you're just like, what should I learn next? One of the questions I saw was, should I learn Kotlin, which is another Android programming language, or stick with Java? And I think that question, the logic behind figuring out what you should do is actually the logic behind if you had any questions about any other 2 programming languages. And we'll definitely address that too. And then lastly, this came up a lot, but you're probably hearing you need a coding portfolio, you need a project portfolio, you need like a really good portfolio on GitHub on your website. And then you're probably like, okay, well, what does that look like? What is the template? What is the guide? What are the actual tangible things that I can do today, tomorrow, a month from now to build a great portfolio? And so yes, like I'm repeating myself, but we'll go over that too. But the first question I want to address is actually, so only one person asked this, but I think the answer to this will answer all of our questions, which is, what is the most important part of the career lessons? So if you haven't had a chance to go in, I'll give you a quick summary. The career lessons focuses on industry research, and that seems like a big thing. It's not a research paper, I promise. It's actually just kind of seeing what's available in your area. Let's say I'm in San Francisco right now. There's a lot going on in tech, but let's say you live in another part of the country and you don't want to move. You want to stay where you are. How do you figure out what's available to you? Like, if you want to be a web developer, are there web developer jobs? But web developers for which industry? There are some cities where there are a lot of web developers for people who work in finance, but maybe in another city, there's not really a finance industry there, so you wouldn't be able to find a job. So the career lessons are about how to figure out what you want, how to actually seek that out and do kind of build that knowledge and that context about your environment before you can actually start targeting jobs. And then the most important crux of it is that by the end of the lesson, you should be able to feel comfortable and empowered to reach out to someone in your potential network and send them a message and actually meet with them. Because the people that you will reach out to who work in your area, who have the job you want, or a job you're just curious about, who work in the companies that are the one most likely to hire you because you're likely to apply there, they're going to have more insight than I could ever give you. If you wanted to get a job at Udacity, I actually do have a lot of advice, but if you wanted a job in, I've never gotten a job in Cleveland, Ohio, so I wouldn't be able to really tell you, this company is this company is this. And by kind of knowing who to reach out to in your area, you'll be able to get those answers. So I mean, you probably know Nick's name. So I'd like for you to kind of envision this, like after, the next week, as you're going through the lessons, you should be able to go on LinkedIn or Facebook or sending an email. There's a lot of other platforms that the lesson goes over, but you're able to say, pretend I'm an aspiring Android developer. You can message someone and say, "Hi, Nick. While researching the mobile app industry in Washington, D.C., your name popped up. I downloaded your company's app, and you seem to be doing awesome things. I'd be really curious to learn more about your work. Would you be open to chatting with me, next week?" And the message really is that simple. You've noticed that I don't even mention anything about I'm a Grow with Google scholar or I'm learning Android development or anything like that. And it's because this is all you really need to do. Like, you don't need to feel like you have to pitch yourself, like come up with an elevator pitch before you can reach out to someone. All you need to do is just say, "Hey, you're interesting. Could you tell me a bit more?" And you'll find that most people love sharing their story and sharing their experiences with anyone who seems to be interested. All right, so let's hop into why I think this will is relevant to everyone. I think sometimes people have a concern that I don't I sometimes hear from people who live in maybe non-tech hubs in the US or internationally, and they say, there's not really there's no Silicon Valley here. How in the world am I going to be able to talk to someone who can help me get a job in this area when I don't think there are any jobs in this area. So I would call that out as that's an assumption on your part. And if you haven't done the research yet, the industry research, then you don't know for sure. And so I pulled this up on LinkedIn. I just chose like really random areas in the US. And I searched the term developer. And I do have a little caveat here that developer can also mean other things. It can include jobs that are not web and mobile. But I just wanted to give you kind of like a little snapshot. Like my search doesn't include software engineer, which would also probably beef up the results a bit. But in kind of areas that sometimes people don't think of Little Rock, Arkansas as a tech hub, but there are over 2,000 people who have the role of developer. And I actually went through a few pages, and most of them are web and mobile developers. And if you live in that area and you want to confirm for yourself that there's a job here, what does that job look like? What are the companies? There are over 2,000 people that you can speak to that can actually give you those answers. And even in areas where there doesn't seem to be a lot, like in Anchorage, Alaska, you might only see 750. You might think, that's not that much. But then I also challenge you, you probably can't name 750 people off the top of your head. So 750 people are actually quite a lot. And so this is just for me to tell you that in a lot of your questions, a lot of people brought up concerns that, my background is a bit different. I learned things a bit different. My work history isn't traditional. And I just want to tell you that in all of these thousands of people, there is probably someone that shares some of the shared background with you. You could, if you think, I don't have a college degree in computer science, how can I become an engineer? There is someone in your area who does not have a college degree at all, maybe, and is a software engineer. And you can connect with them and ask, how did you do it? Can you can you advise me? I'll take a pause here to share one more story about how meeting with people can actually answer your really tough personal questions. One person, I don't know her name, but she wrote into the survey that she expressed concern because she's a single mom and that she wants to become a developer, but she's concerned that this world, this tech industry, these companies, they may not be compatible with the responsibilities that she has as a mother and as a single mother at that. And she also probably has some concerns about, is this like a financially stable field? Will I be able to grow? Will I be able to send my kids to college, right? And the person who knows that answer is someone who is also a parent who works as a developer in her area. So she could reach out to a software engineer she finds in her area and ask them to meet for a coffee chat. And during the coffee chat say, hey, can I ask you something kind of personal? I love the work I'm doing. I love learning. I really want to become a web developer. But you know what? I do have some concerns that the kind of the lifestyle of a developer is not, or the work environment is not compatible with what I need to do as a mom. I need to be able to pick up my kids at 3 o'clock. I need to be able to be home for dinner. What do you think? And that person will be able to tell her, actually, the company that I work for is families first. And they're incredibly flexible with if you need to pop out for an hour or two to take care of what you need to take care of. Your other teammates will help you, will support you. But you know what? There are also other areas and other companies where they don't have that environment, where you will see that parents miss children recitals because that's the company culture. And I can talk in trends because trending in the US, it's actually very pro-family and pro-flexibility, but there are companies that aren't flexible. And you won't really know what those companies are until you ask someone that has worked there, or is working there, or knows someone who works there. Okay, so back to the career lesson. There are, I think, 3 main parts to the career lesson that addresses these questions. The first is, what do you want? What do you care about? Do you care about, just, is it programming? You just love the kind of the science and the math behind it, and you want to just pursue that? Do you care about having a sustainable career? Maybe you were laid off and that upturned your life, and you need a career that is stable and has a future. So the self-reflection exercise in the career lesson kind of goes over that, kind of puts it in front of your face. What do you want? What do you care about? and then it helps you connect what you want to questions that you could ask somebody. It's kind of awkward and kind of maybe not the best idea to ask someone like, how much money do you make? But there's still other ways to ask like questions so you can get kind of your answer, your question still answered. Like you could ask them, hey, have you grown in your job in the last in the last 3 years you've been at the company? And if that person's been promoted, that means that the company is invested in the growth of someone, and that probably means the role is sustainable, stable, and that you're actually getting raises too. So that can give you some idea that, you know what, this is actually, I feel really good about going into tech. The other part, which we've talked about a bit, is what's in your area, what's available to you, and it just gives you more context and tangible goals. When you hear about tech, you probably hear about Google, Facebook, and they do have offices around the world. But what if there's no Google or Facebook where you want to work, or where you're considering you want to work? So what else? There's so much more out there for you. I think even the coffee shops in my hometown have a website and a web app. So there's just literally, I want to say unlimited possibilities for you to be able to find work, but you just got to know what's out there. If you live in Washington, D.C., a lot of the tech jobs are probably related to government some way. But if it's in Boston, where there are a lot of colleges, there's probably a lot of tech stuff related to academia and things of that nature. So you're going to only be able to know what's in your area by talking to people and hearing what they have to say. And then lastly, this is the most important one. Who can help you? Who can I connect in a meaningful way? So you might be right now saying, okay, Trinh told me that there are thousands of people I can talk to. Well, that doesn't really help me. How do I find 1 to 5 people out of 50,000 people to talk to? So we also get into that about how you can narrow your search. So I showed you right here where I did a search in LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn because I feel like the people who are already on LinkedIn are already willing to talk to people. That's why they put their public profile out. So if you reach out to someone with a really good profile on LinkedIn, they're probably willing to, they already put themselves out there, so they're probably willing to talk to you. So developers in San Francisco, there's over 100,000 people. I could never go over those pages. But if I can narrow my search down to web or mobile developers who work in the music industry, that's 178 people, and I can go through that list. If you can spend an hour listening to me, you can spend an hour going through potential profiles, only 170 of them, to see who catches your eyes. And a strategy that I had when I did informational interviews is I actually just reached out to the first person I saw that seemed like, oh, they seem interesting. And that's usually the first or second person I saw. And because you also want to be open and to see, to not come in kind of, I think, with any bias, just be open to hearing what they have to say, and they may even change your mindset. Okay, now I promised you that I would actually answer your questions. So let me take a sip of water and then I will go into the next slide. Okay, so one of your questions is, again, like I started my career in something else, and now I want to change my career. And I think you're kind of worried, like, I have to start from scratch. I was a manager in my current field, and now I have to be an entry-level person with all the recent young college grads. So the first thing I want to say is that you don't have to start over. Usually with career transitions, especially if you're a senior person, and like if you're a director in your current field, let's say you were in finance and you were a director of sales or something like that, you don't necessarily need to become an intern. You will likely have to take maybe 1 or 2 steps back. Maybe instead of you're not going to instantly become a director of engineering, right? But a software engineer is, it could be an entry-level role, or it could actually be a mid-level role. And it honestly depends on your experiences, the company. When you are interviewing for roles, you need to reframe your experiences and education and to that specific role, and then you can make actually a case that you are qualified for maybe roles that aren't completely entry level, that maybe are a little bit not senior, but maybe they're like maybe 1 or 2 levels above entry level, and you can have like a salary and also a seniority that is kind of more comfortable with what you're used to. So let me dive a little bit deeper into how to reframe your experiences in education. So one person wrote in, I'm a civil engineer, programming is completely new to me, and I don't see how like this field can relate. Like, I actually didn't spend that much time on a computer as a civil engineer. How can I show them? And I think this is actually why networking really helps, because if you get another person to look at your profile and give you feedback, they will be able to see stuff that you don't see. So the civil engineer, from his or her comment, gave me the impression that they don't really know how their previous career relates. So I'm going to give you an example. Let's say you are a civil engineer and you want to become an app developer at Lyft, which is the rideshare app. And so you're talking to someone in an informational interview or in an interview. You could say, hey, you know what? I'm a user of Lyft, and sometimes it's really, really hard for me to use the app and see exactly where the car is, especially when I'm in an intersection with multiple roads or I'm under an overpass. I don't know where my car is, and it's because the map is kind of, it doesn't really show you. But you know what? When I was a civil engineer, we actually used these design software and these design practices to be able to really show that clearly. Because as a civil engineer, I actually had to design, roadways and stuff. And you know what? This is when you can draw on your programming experience. I was actually working on a personal project where I was, doing this little web app that was a little game that included doing that map. I'd be really interested in combining what I know about roadways and how to kind of showcase maps and combine that with the programming experience I have and improve the product for Lyft. So, right now, instead of saying I'm a civil engineer, I've never, programmed for a real life employer, that's not your message anymore. It's that hey, you know what? I have actually a lot of experience and context that can help you. I've identified an issue that your company has, and I have a solution, and I can think of a solution. And kind of going into that and kind of keep making those connections and telling people those connections, those are really powerful. And that's how I see graduates with previous careers in different fields. That's how they're able to jump to tech. And then this is a really important one, which is to have recent projects in your portfolio. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be, perfect. But if you are trying to prove to someone that you're serious about a career change, then you need to be able to say, last week I was coding. Recently I was working on this app. They need to be able to go to your GitHub and see that you've been coding, because otherwise, where's the proof, right? Where is the proof that you actually want to become a software engineer if you don't have recent projects to show? We'll dig into this a little deeper when I go over the portfolio question. Okay, so next one is, how do you, you're looking, this is your first time looking for a job, but how do you get an entry-level job that asks for 3 years of experience? Does this employer even know what entry level is? So the first thing I would say is that you need to champion yourself. We are our own worst critic. And again, this is when talking to other people can help. There's a strategy called objection tackling in sales, where one person is supposed to kind of say a doubt or a concern they have about themselves, and then everyone else refutes it. When one of my colleagues was promoted recently, he was so surprised that happened. He wasn't even thinking of angling for a promotion. It just happened. And he was like, I had no idea where it came from. And then that's when everyone else in the company was like, are you kidding me? You did all of this stuff. How do you not see it? And so I think it's sometimes difficult for us to see our own accomplishments and what we've done. So if you're looking at a job posting and you feel like, I can do this, then you know what? You probably can do it. But in how you talk to the employer and how you format your resume, which you'll find out a bit more in the next webinar, bring out the best of yourself and make sure people know it and make sure to state it. Because most job listings are a wish list. When someone asks for 10 things, they're probably only looking for 6 things. But you ask for 10 things, and then there are people who will only have 8 things, 4 things out of that list who will apply. And then you'll be really happy if you get someone with 5 of the 6 things or 7 of the 6 things. That's more than you expected. So just understand that, yes, you should take job listings seriously, because if you don't have, a core technical skill that's essential for the job, like if you want to become an Android developer and you don't know Java, then, that's not going to work out. But if someone's asking for college experience or some work experience, the reason behind that is that they're just looking for proof that you have the skills, and they're using years of experience and college degrees as the evidence, as the proof that you have that, those skills. And so if you don't have, years of experience or a degree, then you need to add in other proof. And usually the other proof will be your projects, your personal nano-degree projects, projects that you do outside of Udacity, freelance roles, contract gigs, collaboration. You're all in Slack together. If 2 or 3 or 4 of you guys get together and code something, you can say that you worked on a team project together and that you launched a team app together. That's amazing, because every engineer works in a team. So that's what I mean by recognize the gaps and address them. Maybe this company is asking for someone for 2 to 3 years of experience in Java. It probably means they just want to see like 1 or 2, maybe 3 really big, live apps that you've developed. So if you have an app in the Google Play Store, I think you've already checked that off. You can say, hey, I may not have this work experience, but you know what? I launched an app and it's in the Google Play Store. So you should give me the benefit of the doubt that I have these skills. Okay. This one, I'm going to take a sip of water first, 1 second, and then I'll answer this question. Okay, so the direct question that I got was, should I learn Kotlin or Java? And I could apply this to, should I learn Python or C++? Should I learn whatever? I'm going to talk generally because I don't know each of you individually, but I'm going to make the assumption that the majority of you are relatively new to programming. I know some of you have already held jobs as developers or engineers, but the first question is directed toward people who are kind of new to this. And it's that you should become fluent in one programming language first. So I think where the concern with Kotlin or Java is that Google last year announced Kotlin as one of their new hot programming languages. And then everyone was like, no, I've been learning Java for a few years. Does that mean my skill is obsolete now? And that is not true. Google announced it last year. Udacity still uses Java for our Android apps. Most companies still do. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden Java is obsolete. It just means there's this new language. If you looked up all programming languages, it's actually a list of hundreds and hundreds. And each engineering team decides what they want to do. An engineering manager may be like, hey, you know what? I like what Kotlin can do. Let's change our Android apps. Then the entire engineering team would actually be expected to learn it. And that's what engineers do. They have to learn and adapt all the time. And they're only able to learn and adapt because they became an expert in one thing first. So let me give you a scenario. Let's say you give yourself 6 months to learn how to program before you apply to your first job as a developer. Let's say you spent 3 months learning Java, and then you hear about Kotlin. You're like, oh no, I should switch because that's a new hot thing. And then you switch over and you learn Kotlin. So what's going to happen is that at the end of 6 months, you would have forgotten everything you learned about Java because you didn't practice, and then you would be a beginner in Kotlin. So let's do another scenario where you actually spend the 6 months learning Java, and then you're so proficient in it, like it's kind of learning a new language, right? If you know what nouns, verbs, adverbs are, then you can know in English, then you can know them in Spanish or French, right? So in the second scenario, you spent 6 months learning Java, you're pretty proficient, and because you kind of know how programming languages work, you're actually going to be able to learn Kotlin faster. So you can say at the end of 8 months that you're proficient in Java and you're a beginner in Kotlin, rather than if you switch over now without knowing a programming language first, you're only a beginner in Kotlin and you forgot everything about Java. For people who are already fluent in programming languages and you're trying to figure out what should I learn next to still be to still have the hot skills, research job postings and see what employers request. You'll actually find that some employers, just because it's hard to change everything you're doing, they're actually still using really kind of old programming languages to build their apps. And for example, in iOS, many companies still use Objective-C, even though everyone thinks Swift is the standard. And people are moving, like, I think overall the majority of iOS apps are done in Swift, but there are some that are done in Objective-C or Java, actually, in their iOS apps. So each company figures out for themselves what their tech stack should be. And lastly, this is where networking comes in. Learn from other engineers what they're using. Maybe a job posting tells you that they want someone to know Java, but you can talk to the engineer, and the engineer saying, actually, our director of engineering wants us to move to Kotlin by the end of next year. So you're able to learn from them and say, oh, that means when I interview for this job, if I do get an interview, then I can actually tell them about how much I learned Kotlin. And the director of engineering will be able to make that connection and be like, oh, this person would be fantastic to join our team with what I have in plan. Okay, so the last question that I'm going to go over before we go live is, what does a great portfolio look like? What does this mean? Do I need to have a portfolio of, I'm trying to think of, like, I can't really think right now of a really famous software engineer, but you probably see some software engineer personalities that talk about this new project that they're doing every single week. And you're kind of exhausted, right? Like, I can't produce an app every single week. Like, I gotta go to school. I have a job. I have kids. Well, you don't have to be like that if you do like to blog about a new app every week, that's fantastic. But if you don't, there are other ways. So the most important part of a portfolio is that you should have one passion project. And the passion project does not have to be Facebook or Instagram or Lyft or Uber. Like, it doesn't have to be that big. It doesn't have to even be something as big as, I'm trying to think of Angry Bird, if you remember that. That was a kind of simple game that took off a few years ago. It doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be the #1 app in the store. It just has to be something that someone can see. Remember, you need proof that you're passionate, right? The proof is one project that you keep coming back to, that you keep improving, and that you can actually show to someone, like, hey, when I started off working on this 6 months ago, this was my first version, and I'm just so interested, and I'm so fascinated, and I'm so committed that I keep coming back, I keep improving it, and you can talk hours upon hours about it. And that energy and that passion is infectious, and it actually makes the person you're talking to, whether it's someone you're networking with, whether it's just a peer or an interviewer, an employer, they're just like, that's great. I would love to have someone with your dedication on my team. So yeah, at least one passion project. And if you don't like what you're working on, move on to the next project. But I do recommend that there's kind of like a capstone. And if you do move forward with the Android Developer Nanography program, there is a capstone project in that too. And so versions and updates of the same project is kind of what I was getting at, in that no Udacity, for example, we've gone through 4 or 5 versions of our classroom. So nothing's ever done and then moved on. Actually, when people design a product, they actually design it in versions. Like, this is what we're going to launch this year. Next year is going to be this, like how you always get an update to Facebook or an update to Twitter. So that you kind of have this mentality of the software development cycle is really important and really impressive, because a lot of people think of things as beginning to end, whereas software development is actually never ending. And this is a really important thing. A great portfolio needs to look great, needs to look live. It needs to be live. So this is kind of the proof again. You tell someone, I've been working on A, B, and C. So how do they know that? How can they verify it? And usually people can verify with work experience, maybe sometimes with education. But if you're saying you're working on this awesome app, be able to show it to them. If you're able to get an app into the Google Play or Apple Store, if you're designing a website, having just a website portfolio, even sometimes screenshots on GitHub is enough. People understand sometimes that you can't always share everything. Like, maybe you're working on this app and you don't want anyone to steal it, right? So you kind of are private about it, but you can still share something, and you can trust that the other person will understand, that there's more to it, because you gave them that teaser, that hint. So just to re-summarize, whatever your portfolio looks like, it should have one thing at minimum that you really, really love and that you can talk about forever. It should show improvements over time, that you're a problem solver and that you keep thinking of new issues and you keep thinking of solutions, and that it needs to be accessible to the public. They're going to be able to see it somehow. All right, so that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening to me for 36 whole minutes. I am going to stop sharing my screen, and you can see my face again, and I'll take your questions.
Okay, so our first question, which I think Trinh touched on, but I thought was really good, and it sounded like a lot of students have this question, is should I be applying for positions where I do not meet 100% of the skill requirements? So if a student meets 75%, do you think that they should still be applying for that position?
100%. So this is how you should look at job postings. There's the core requirement, kind of what I said. If you want to be an Android developer, you need to know Java. If you want to be a web developer, then you probably need to have, more than develop maybe more than one website or web page. But other than that, everything is a wish list. And honestly, I have never ever applied to a job that I fulfilled 100% of the requirements for. And it's not just because, I'm full of myself, but it's actually because it would be really boring to do a job that you already know how to do. So that means you're not learning anything. And employers don't want that either. People who get bored with their jobs leave, or they don't perform really well. And employers know that. There's a bunch of HR research behind that too. That's why like my manager is really concerned with my growth. So every day she throws me something completely new, and that's why I'm still at Udacity. That's why I'm in Udacity my third year. So 100%, if you feel like you meet the bare requirements, like the bare minimum requirements, but the overall job posting you fulfill maybe 60, 70% of, I would just apply. I think you'll find that if you champion yourself, you're a really good candidate.
Another question we got from a few students is if a student is interested in starting their own business and not necessarily going into the workforce or going and working for a company, do you think any of these tips apply, or do you have any additional tips to give them?
Mm-hmm. Then I think my networking advice is so vital to you, because in order to start a company, you need people on your side, right? Whether it's funders or just people who are willing to talk about what you're doing to other people. And so you need to share your story. I will send Kelsey. I'm not sure what you mean by your own company, like whether you want to start your own company or you kind of want to be self-employed and have your own, be a freelancer. So we have a freelancing guide that I will share with Kelsey that you could look at. We also have, if you're into app development, we have a guide on how to publish a mobile app, and that could be your business. But in terms of, I think you will need to learn from other people how they start off their companies. There are different platforms online that will, show you how do you get funding. How do you get the first people? How do you do your first hire? How do you do taxes? There's a lot of stuff out there, and how you know if that stuff is actually good and valid is if you ask someone else who started their own company and say, hey, what did you do? What were your mistakes? What would you recommend I do? And learn from it.
Another question we had was, does your passion project need to be solo, or could you have a passion project with a group?
I love that question. In an ideal world, everyone should only code with other people. Because again, that's how engineering teams work. No one can do, unless it's a very small app, which I don't think so, but there's always a back-end engineer, a front-end engineer, a full stack that does both, an engineering manager. If you are working for a team that has a mobile and website, there's mobile developers and web developers, so that you can show that you can kind of function in that environment is really important. We have a free course on Udacity called GitHub and Collaboration, and I'll send that to Kelsey too. I recommend you all look through it, because the number one ask of engineering managers when we try to show our students to other employers is, I want to be able to go on their GitHub and see them collaborate. And so GitHub and Collaboration actually shows you the methods to collaborate. So you can, put that on your resume. You can show that to an employer, and you can actually kind of show how you collaborate publicly. And to be honest too, like if you work with other people, you're likely to like it more, right? Because you get to talk with people, share in your successes, work through problems together, and it won't make kind of, sometimes programming and online learning can be a bit lonely. And if you're with someone else, even if online, it would just make it a better experience.
Another question we just got is, should I try to switch roles within my company, or should I look outside my company for a new job?
I think you should actually talk to your manager and see. Again, it depends on the company. Udacity, for example, is really, really good with explorerships and trying to help people move around the company. In the career lesson, you meet my colleague Chris, who actually joined Udacity as a content developer, and now he's an engineer. And Udacity was completely, supportive of his desire to be a software engineer. They helped him. They helped him with a break when he wanted to go to school to learn a bit more, and they kind of interviewed him for a software engineering role here. And luckily, it worked out because he's amazing, and I love working with him. So if your company is a company that there's a role open, and there's a space for that, pursue it, because your manager should be your number one champion at work. And if you see a path for yourself to another team, they should continue to champion that. But likewise, if that role doesn't exist, then it doesn't exist. The careers team is hiring to give you an example, my careers team currently is hiring for another engineer. And once we hire that person, we're not going to hire another engineer. So even if they love me and I want to be an engineer, there is actually no role open for me to make that transition. So there's different strategies, but the first thing would be to talk to your manager and to see the possibilities.
Another question that just came in that I think you touch on in the career resources, but how can students make their LinkedIn profile more professional, and how do they add this experience to their LinkedIn profile?
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of the advice that you'll learn from Kathleen in the resume webinar will transfer over to LinkedIn also. I think so. LinkedIn has a bunch of algorithms that I don't really know. I can't explain them to you. But so I recommend kind of don't plagiarize anyone's words, but find someone that you admire and that you seem to have a lot of connections. They seem to be really active on LinkedIn, and just kind of figure out what they do. The very basics of making it professional is just filling in the details. If you are just switching careers, have a 1 or 2 liner summary about your transition and kind of get inspired. It's kind of hard for me to give advice because when it comes to stuff like this, getting personalized advice is the best way. And you can get personalized advice by just asking each other or asking people on Slack and getting feedback, and also asking people you network with. But how I'm trying to, I think your question may be, how do I add this? How do I add Grow with Google into my LinkedIn? So you could put that under, your education, and that you can put in kind of, you're allowed to put awards underneath education in LinkedIn. So that's pretty impressive. And for your tagline, I would put, Grow with Google Scholar, for example, in your tagline, because you can read endless articles about this, but LinkedIn has their own search engine optimizations, and rather than having aspiring Android developer in your tagline, to just say what exactly you're doing now, building Android apps or building websites, freelance web developer, or just front-end engineer, whatever, those are more likely to show up, not just to recruiters, but just to everyone. And you may even get people coming to you asking to network with you.
We have a student who is interested in relocating to another state and wants to know if they are less likely to get a job because they don't live in the state that they are applying to.
I know you probably are tired of me saying this, but it really depends on the company. Some companies are fantastic with relocation. They kind of understand that sometimes the best candidate for the job doesn't live in this area. And especially in Silicon Valley, where it's so expensive to live here, it's I think employers in this area realize we can't expect, someone, potential job candidate to move here before they get a job offer. So a lot of companies are really good with relocation. And so I think different people will tell you different things. I know that, so when I moved from California to Washington, D.C., and then I moved back to California. And when I moved to Washington, D.C., everyone told me, hey, it's pretty traditional here. People like to start jobs, like new employees to start jobs immediately. So if you are in Washington, D.C., you will have a better chance. And I was scared of that. So I actually took another friend's address and I put that on my resume. I knew I was moving to DC, but I wanted to apply to jobs before I moved. And so, but that's because I asked someone and they told me, hey, I've lived in DC for 5 years. This is what I believe. When I moved back to California, I was actually not in the US for about 6 months. I was actually in Vietnam. And I actually had never looked for really a job in San Francisco before, despite growing up in California. And so I asked people in my network, and they're like, yeah, no one really cares. Just tell them when you'll be back in the US, and they'll make it work if they like you. And that was true too. In my cover letters, I wrote, I'm currently in Vietnam, and I expect to be back in California in August. And I feel like you could say, and I'm willing to relocate. I would need 2 weeks lead time or 1 month lead time at minimum. And in Silicon Valley, the employer's mindset is not, I need this person to start immediately. It's, I need to find the best candidate. And if I need to give them an extra month, then I'm willing to do that because I want them to join my team.
A student just asked, what questions do you ask the person, developer or director, who you are reaching out to? It always feels like if the questions are not good, it might be a waste of their time. So what kind of questions do you ask someone that you are getting an interview, an informational coffee with?
The career lesson goes over this too, but so here are some really good questions. I learned this from one of my colleagues who used to work in marketing, and there's actually kind of a science behind it, and that you just ask people about themselves. So don't ask, what jobs do you think are available to me? Because I don't know. I don't know what you want. I don't know what's important to you. But if you ask, why did you join software engineering? What are the problems that you face in your day-to-day? Everyone will answer that. In fact, people would love you if you ask them what their problems were, because then they can just complain to you, and people love having someone to complain to, right? Who's willing to listen to them. So ask them about their work, ask them what they're interested in, how they got where they are. And then finally, kind of after you've had that conversation, if you haven't had your answers yet, you can at the end say, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. It really solidifies for me that I want to work in this area. I'm kind of unsure where I fit into all of this. I do know I wanted to become a developer. Do you have recommendations for me for someone else I can talk to? And they might refer you to someone else. And that's when you give someone else an opening to ask you questions. And maybe there's a place for you. Maybe there's an internship or an explorership, or they just want to talk with you again to continue kind of seeing you grow.
Any tips for phone interviews? I did get some phone interviews, but it's nerve-wracking. How do I stand out?
Oh, yeah, I hate interviews too. It's because it's so easy to just forget you're talking to someone. Sometimes you're just like in your office and you're just and you're staring off into the wall and you can get distracted. I hate phone interviews, but I know they happen. I had with Udacity, I had a phone interview. Actually, every single job I've ever had, I've had a phone interview. So a couple recommendations. Sometimes people are concerned that they're speaking too much. So if you can have like a clock to look at, try not to speak for more than 2 minutes at a time. That's not to say all your answers need to be under 2 minutes, but just kind of give the first 2 minutes of your answer, and then check in with the interviewer, like, hey, I'd like to continue on, but I wanted to make sure that I was able to answer your other questions. Would you like me to continue? And that's just like a really easy way to get them to engage with you and have it be actually a conversation rather than you just talking. And it just makes it a little bit easier, because an interview is just a really formal conversation, right? And a conversation is only successful if there's a back and forth. So that's probably my biggest tip. And my other tip is to do what will kind of calm you down. For me, it's pacing. I actually have never sat down and done a phone interview because I need to pace. I'm too nervous. But for some other people, they just like to be in their chair with their coffee and stuff. Yeah, so I would also ask everyone on Slack too, like if they have any advice for phone interviews, and maybe voice your particular concerns about phone interviews and see what advice people have.
I'm currently a mechanical engineer, design engineer, who is wanting to jump into tech. Should I include my mechanical experience on my resume?
Yes, 100%. Actually, anybody, include your experience in your resume. If you have like a long career in another field, like 20 years of experience, you may want to shorten it a bit. But having someone who knows how to work at a company for X amount of years is always impressive. And don't forget that there's a reason why the term engineer applies to both. There's a reason why many companies have both mechanical engineers and software engineers and lawyers and business analysts and customer service reps. You all function in this kind of system together, right? And so my recommendation there is, rather than talk about the kind of the ins and outs of what a mechanical engineer actually does, like maybe I can't think of an example right now, but think about what relates between mechanical engineering to software development. And I think the biggest thing is that you actually know how to take a concept, work with other people, especially other people who don't agree with you, and still launch a live thing to a customer or to a client or to whatever. And a lot of people don't actually have that experience. So I was working with someone he was a sales analyst, so he's never coded before. And he was just like, I only know how to talk in like, selling warehouse stuff. How in the world can I convince someone that I can be a software engineer? And then we kind of went through, back and forth about what he was doing. And then I was like, hey, as a software engineer, you're not just building something, right? You're building something that your business needs. And how to evaluate if something is valuable to a customer. And how to kind of like certain customer behaviors, such as, like, let's say that someone needs to be able to purchase a bunch of stuff all at the same time. Like if it's single purchase, like each time, someone's just going to get annoyed and not purchase the last few things because they don't want to go through the payment process over and over again. So you can bring that experience into software engineering and say, hey, for this specific company, I actually have a lot of experience working with customers and how to get them to buy stuff. So when I would, develop a website for you, I'd make sure that we build something that makes payments one step super easy, super fast. And that's how you can relate.
I think we have time for one last question. Marco asked a while ago, how can I prepare for technical interview questions? I have gone into some interviews and some of the technical questions have been so over my head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, technical interviews, it's, I said before that interviews are supposed to be conversations. I still believe that's inherently true, but sometimes there's a curveball, right? Like I think if anyone's watched that movie, The Internship, where Google is like, how many something is in this thing? And it's just, what does that have to do? People who go through college or get PhDs or work for 10 years are like, I've never had to solve that issue any time in my life. So why, unless I was at a fair, so why does this matter for this job? So I think the best thing that you can do, one, is to kind of calm yourself down. If you come up with see a question that you just don't know how to answer, break it down. So first thing you should say to the interviewer, it's one thing if you actually don't know, like if they ask you to code something and you actually don't know how to code, that's another issue. But the issue is just, it's a complicated question that includes a bunch of theories, maybe that you didn't study. Just ask, hey, this is pretty big. Can we break it down? And then kind of ask them a question like, would you say, I think the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to try to create a framework to be able to answer this in the first place. What are your thoughts? And the interviewer can either tell you, go ahead. They can tell you, actually, no, I want you to do this. It can be a back and forth. And that's actually a beautiful thing because again, you will never know all of the answers. And if you can show the interviewer that you can recognize that, but instead of being scared, instead of trying to kind of do something only partly, which is never great. Like, no one in any job should do something halfway or kind of fake it until you make it. That means that the product is not going to be great. So to have the interviewer see you as, you know what, this was a hard question for them, but they're still able to figure out methods to solve it with me. That means at work, they're going to be able to figure out with their other team members how to solve this problem. And they're also, I need someone honest. I need someone to tell me when they don't know something, because then that means we can solve it rather than sweeping it under the rug and then having it come up with an app that's broken later on. So yeah, and other than that, I recommend Pramp, which Udacity has a contract with. So I'll also send that to Kelsey. You can have unlimited peer-to-peer mock interviews. And so I think a lot of interviewing is just getting that muscle memory, and learning how to, answer questions, obviously. So you can do peer-to-peer mock interviews and just get better at it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Trinh, for being with us. This was really helpful. And if you would like to watch this video later, you can find it at the same link. It was recorded. And all of the resources that Trinh has shared with us will be on the Google page, which we will post the link to the Google page in the chat. If you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to me or Brenda or Kathleen. But thank you guys so much for joining.